All right, hi, this is Henk. Welcome to another edition of the Skull Sessions. And today my guest is Ian Domowitz. Is that correct?
That's right. You got it.
Holy fuck, I got it right. All right, man. So let's talk about what you have going on.
First of all, thanks for having me on your show. I mean, I've been actually looking forward to speaking with you. I checked your books out, for example, and I
Oh,
sort of
awesome.
liked what I read. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff, but the one I'm a cheap guy, so I've been reading the stuff on Kindle Unlimited. Okay. But the down highways and the dark stuff I really like. So thanks
Oh,
for
nice.
having me.
Yeah, nice.
And I feel like I'm in the right place. Let me tell you why that's true. All right.
Okay.
Um, so when you say what do you have going on, there's lots of ways to describe it, but the current project, I think, is what brought me on your show.
Okay.
I'm writing what you might call dark fantasy now. All right, not like bizarro horror, okay, but truly dark fantasy. All right, and I can explain generally what that means. But right now, I'm fixated on the idea of AI. So this I have a whole series called The Mechanic's Diary, of which the latest is a book called Initial Condition. And this series is really a serial allegory, right? And as it's following an artificial intelligence around, a sentient artificial intelligence, as he looks for the singularity, all right? The way people talk about it, right? When we're all going to merge with the machines and life is going to be beautiful from the artificial intelligence point of view.
Or
Now,
or or bad. You never know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, could be. That's right. But you
Like
got to look at it from
Matrix,
the,
Terminator,
yeah,
Skynet,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But from the point of view of this AI, as I get traction here and the idea of an AI in our society by digging in a little deeper than, some people that think about AI as just a computer program. My AI is actually produced from a 16th century formula uh, by an alchemist by the name of Paracelsus. And part of the book, Initial Condition, depends on the notion of artificial intelligence that was actually investigated as early as, fourth century AD. All right.
So
So,
let me get this correct. So we came up with the concept, but it wasn't until the current day when the technology was present to make that a reality. Is that kind of where you're
ah,
going?
yeah. Now, the idea is the basic idea is, first of all, that artificial intelligence is not new, right? And I think we all kind of understand that, but it's really not new, right? In other words, it didn't start in 1956 like people think.
Right?
And
If you want to go down a rabbit hole, like we could all be in the matrix right now. Like there are all different degrees of what exactly it means by artificial intelligence. But yeah, that's another topic entirely.
yeah, but this is in a sense what this is all about, all right? In other words, we have a being that's actually been bred, not born, all right? He's
Okay.
been he's been put together according to the 16th century recipe.
Okay.
And the modern part of this, in other words, what I have to add on to it is that when he was first, let's say, decanted, um, he was trained in the same way as we think of a large language model these days, right? Like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. All right. So this guy has an education based on text, but the rest of his education has to be obtained by interacting with humans in the real world. Right? Now, that presents some problems, right? And he looks perfectly human, right? But he is artificially intelligent. He is not made by God. Now, in
Is that
this,
is that one
yep.
of those things that kind of evolves over time? Like it needs the input to like make it more complex. So as it gets more input, it gets more complex.
That's right. In other words, like anything like we do. In other words,
Yeah,
the
that's the theory
theme,
of the human brain. It's like the I guess like going down the rabbit hole again, like the whole reason why everything seems to happen faster as you get older is because you have more information in your brain. So you have a whole bunch of stuff all happening all at once. Where before you had such a small, a small litany of things to focus on. Like it seemed like it took forever, but now you have a whole bunch of shit bombarding you all at once.
That's right. And that's how you learn. See, that's what a lot of the artificial intelligence guys really don't get, or at least don't talk about. But there's this guy uh, who's starting up his own thing. He used to be head of AI at Meta, who believes that what's missing is indeed what we learn from other human beings. So
Okay.
my guy learns from other human beings. So the thing is, what we're getting at here is what does consciousness really mean? All right. In other words, this guy speaks. He's got language the same way as Claude or ChatGPT does, and he's
It could
learning and
be
changing.
just to go down another rabbit hole. It could be that consciousness is just a very complex butterfly effect. But
Ah, very good, very good. But see, that theme is running all through this series, which I call the Mechanic's Diary, because this guy gets named a mechanic for various reasons. But in the um, the thing here is that I've just lost the train of thought. I'm really sorry. Uh, no, no, no. I will get it back. The learning, all right, is through the experience. He can only experience this if everybody accepts him as human. He speaks, right, just like Claude or ChatGPT does. But not all artificial intelligence speak, right? In particular, a golem doesn't speak. Now, you might have thought about golems as you cruised around in your own dark fantasy world. But golem was first thought about back around the time of the birth of Christ. Right? It was first written about no later than the 6th century. And a golem does not speak. But you see, the Jews believed in artificial intelligence. They believed in the idea of a being not created by God, but created by man, that actually would be a servant, would do things, would also learn, but would never speak, because language is the one thing that God has bestowed upon humans, right? That really makes them what they are. Now, that's Jewish mystical belief. I didn't have to make any of that up. So they believe,
let me ask you a question because like a lot of what you're saying sounds like a little bit of like sci-fi mixed with history, like kind of historical context. Why would you say that its categories more as like dark fantasy as opposed to science fiction?
ah, okay. So to me, um, see, I want to answer that about 3 ways.
Uh,
um, to me, science fiction is a world. Science fiction consists of worlds that we create, right? That are credible,
okay.
right? In some futuristic sense.
Although
Okay. In other words,
I agree with you. I think a lot of people will try and say anything involving any sort of like a new technology, like Frankenstein, for instance, is science fiction. I wouldn't call Frankenstein science fiction, but a lot of people
no,
do.
no, Frankenstein is another story of artificial intelligence, right? From, in this case, the 19th century, right?
Right.
The But science, that's my view of science fiction. Fantasy is world building without bounds, right? In other words, we don't demand scientific credibility for fantasy, all right? And we can make science fiction as dark as we want and as ugly as we want. I mean, that's not a problem for a writer. But the fantasy world makes that a little easier. all right, in many ways, because you can control your environment in a way that is not really tied to science, right? And as you know, I mean, science fiction's got all its little niches, the hard science crowd, and those who believe that William Gibson is science fiction as much as anything, right? So
There's everything from the like space opera of like Star Wars to the more like technical they consider like hard science, of like Heinlein or something like that. So yeah, there are a bunch of different divisions. Um, I mean, I would say that despite the divisions, it's sci-fi if it goes beyond the Earth. So like we were both
okay.
agreeing. Like Frankenstein is not necessarily science fiction. I would say it's more like dark fantasy than it is science fiction.
I
But
agree, and Guillermo del Toro, I think, if you read his stuff on Frankenstein, what he actually wrote, not just the movie, I mean, you'd know he'd agree with you, no question. So back to where I was trying to go with this, okay? In other words, the my artificially intelligent guy to put all these pieces together um, wanders into a community that actually considers it a crime for the artificially intelligent to speak. And his own family is kidnapped by these fanatics within this community. And so, what
his
the
own family,
novel,
like the artificial intelligence, has a family.
there are all no, there are all sorts of themes that I like to investigate within the artificial intelligence kind of or under the artificial intelligence umbrella. This is one of them. In other words, where where in our consciousness do we get this need to reproduce, for example, right? Well, this guy didn't reproduce by, getting in bed with someone and doing the do and he's not human, right? So what did he do? He created other beings just like himself from the 16th century recipe. Well, why the hell does he do that? Right? That's a question. I'm not intending to answer that question. I'm intending to raise it. In other words, is it part of human consciousness to want to reproduce? Or is it also part of machine consciousness?
I
And
mean,
I'm making a statement there.
I would think that as far as the urge to reproduce is more like a genetic thing that like evolution codes all of us like from animals to plants to humans to do because like the whole reason why like humans like dogs for instance is because they're wide-eyed and they look like a baby child. So it's kind of like we're evolutionarily coded to want to protect that to want to develop that. So
No question. So ask yourself the same question about an artificial intelligence. It's got no evolutionary need to do this whatsoever. All right. It's got
right.
no
So what?
drive.
So what you're saying, what you bring up is what is the urge to replicate yourself if you don't have that chemical urge?
Yeah. So this guy has the urge. It's part of one of the many questions that I try to raise. So his kids, let's call them kids, actually get kidnapped and sentenced to death in this community
With
for the crime of
the artificial intelligence's kids.
yeah, for the crime of speech. As they speak, okay, the artificially intelligent resident of this community um, does not speak because it's a golem. So all of these stories have my artificial intelligence, who is technically called homunculus by the alchemist community. Meets up with these other monsters, if you will, or at least other artificial intelligences from history. So
Isn't the name going back to a little bit of a like turn of the century like authors? Wasn't homunculus like a creature or something?
yes. So a homunculus is a creature, but it goes back much earlier. That's my point. The homunculus was actually created in print
Hmm.
by a 16th century alchemist and doctor by the name of Paracelsus.
Okay.
And Paracelsus actually even wrote down the recipe for producing this thing.
Okay.
And you can read about it in his own words. And so I actually go through that. The So it did. Homunculus sort of had a revival sometime in the early 19th century, I think. There was even a silent movie that was made. But people really haven't written about it or used it. I mean, there's a whole book that's really more academic on it by Andrew Newman called Prometheus. And he actually
Not to be confused with the movie.
not to be definitely not to be confused with that movie. Absolutely not. And one of my favorites, by the way. Um, so so anyway, the story concerns, right, the crime of speech, right? And one reason that I like it for that, even though it's really designed as dark fantasy, even horror in some ways, um, is that it does ask what I think is a really interesting question right now, and that is if ChatGPT, Claude, and so on can speak well enough, right, to pass as human if you can't see them, right? Are they conscious?
Right.
Right? Is my guy conscious because he speaks? You see, the Jews believe that your consciousness, right, is tied to speech. And there's a lot of early AI stuff that talks the same way, or early philosophy, if you like. All right. That speech is tied to consciousness. But we have AIs who talk. All right. I'm sort of bringing that out by saying, what if speech was outlawed? All right. What if it became a crime? All right. Even, seen by those who also think that there can be artificial intelligence without it. I mean, what does that mean?
You know what I've heard is I've heard that consciousness is just reaction to input.
Mhm.
Like for instance, a cockroach is conscious, but self-awareness is actually when you can like say look in the mirror and you go, "That's me."
Right. That is right. So think about a recurring theme in my books here as this guy trying to figure out when he looks in the mirror, is that me?
Right.
Okay. And, so he's going through life like that.
Okay.
And in this particular chapter of his life, he meets up with another artificial intelligence, and also with this, let's call it a prejudice or a belief that his life is actually forfeit for the crime of talking. That's an incredible free speech message in many ways, but it's meant to be more of an intelligence message. All right. Now, as a consciousness really shouldn't be confused with speech. We're not talking about the same thing, but we have for centuries. But anyway, I like it because it's a damn good dark fantasy story. I can't give up story for the philosophy. I'm really into the philosophy. But I love the idea, as you say, of dragging the past into the future. Okay. I call it anachronistic futurism. No, there are lots of authors that have really done that in one way or another. I mean, even Name of the Rose, Umberto Eco, even in mysteries, where we have ancient texts that are supposed to shed light on what's going on today. So here we have ancient beings that are actually coming to life in the
Well,
21st century.
you could go down a rabbit hole and like bring up Graham Hancock and all the ancient civilization theories and all that stuff.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, I like all of that. And but as a writer, and I know you feel this, I think, just as a creator, forget the writing part, right? You're always looking for a way to express, even if it's the same thing, but in a different way, right? And I feel like that we've seen a lot of literature of that type, and we've seen a lot of even fiction, AI fiction that characterizes it as some kind of faceless thing that is somehow super intelligent, and the whole Terminator thing, as you point out. Um, but my AI has a face. My AI has a life. My AI is actually a mechanic. He's a motorcycle mechanic. Um,
I guess it kind of depends. Like, so the whole concept of the soul is a theoretical concept. Like, not everyone believes in the soul, but if we just use like the idea of a soul, like as in like it's a living actual being, would you say
mhm.
the AIs are actual beings, or would you say they're actually considered by society to be like some sort of like replicant, not really a real thing?
Yeah, that's exact the latter. Okay. Let me give you another really old example. You can tell I'm into old. Okay. So
Mm.
there was this crazy guy who almost became a saint back in the 12th century. Right. His name was Lull, and he became the Blessed Lull. Didn't get to sainthood. I guess you need to do more miracles or something. But Lull, uh, amongst the various things he did, he was interested in the so-called tree of life. All right. So the Catholics back in the day, they thought about the tree of life the same way as any pagan would, right? God at the top and, vegetables at the bottom, fundamentally, right? Humans somewhere in between. And he wrote about putting a being created by man on the tree of life and placed that being at the bottom of the tree. Right? But when you turn the tree around in a circle, which was his shtick, you found that that being was actually sitting at the right hand of God in his philosophy. So you've got a case in which this notion of artificiality in the soul, right, has been thought about, right, in our own religious history for quite some time. Right?
I noticed it a lot in your writing. You keep bringing up religious concepts. Is there a religion tied into it? Like, is it kind of founded off a religious belief in something specific?
Oh, no, the religion thing. See, in a sense I'm spanning it. Let me. There's no particular religion, and it's not even religion per se. All right, but it's a really convenient, if you want, trope for fiction. Okay.
Okay.
Um, it happens to be that mystics from established religions were the guys that actually put forward the notion of artificial intelligence for the first time.
Well,
So,
there's also, sorry to cut you off, but there's also kind of the
yeah.
concept that like all religions are basically stories about the same thing. Like there's something behind them and they have different interpretations.
I happen to be a fan of that theory, all right, with all the right caveats. So, as a matter of fact, this guy Lull believed that through his actions, he did other things, right? He was going to unify, right, all these faiths so they would see exactly what you were talking about, right? That was his goal in life. And for that, he was made a blessed person, not a saint, but a blessed person. So that may be right, but my concentration on religion, that all comes from the mysticism. I'm looking for a different way to tell stories, right? Stories particularly about artificial intelligence. And I find that these mystical writings provide a great, uh, I don't know, a source of material, if you like, right?
Well, because we kind of like we covered a whole bunch of topics. It's very broad, expansive stuff. But if you narrowed it down to your book, what specifically is the like? What's the goal? What's the agenda? What's the storyline?
Okay. The agenda of the book is to talk about the role of language in consciousness, right? At a very metaphysical level. The intent of the book, as I wrote it, is to be a fantasy adventure, all right? Something that, if you were a 14-year-old and liked to wear black, all right, you'd love this book. If you were a 30 something and had tats like yourself, you'd like to read this book. I guarantee. Um, and I wrote it for that kind of pleasure, but I really do like the idea that there's a theme to it, right? And the notion that it explicates the relationship between consciousness and artificial intelligence is actually pretty dear to my heart. So I'm hoping people get some of that out of it as well. But I write for people to have a good time, all right? If they can't have a good time, they're not going to listen to me.
Do you focus more on the artificial consciousness or more on society's reaction to it? Or like it is it first
Oh,
person?
the
Is it
first.
third person? Is it like this guy is like the main protagonist? I mean, how do
Yeah,
you rate it?
yeah. I call the series a diary because he is the protagonist. And this book in particular is actually a novella instead of a novel. And a novella really only allows for a single point of view, right? I mean, it's too short, 150 pages maybe. Um,
Okay.
so, so yeah, the protagonist, I tend to write, to be specific. I'm writing in what they call the close third person.
Okay.
Okay. I can't, I've written, I can't even really carry first person the way, for example, you do. And no, in your book, as I read it, you have this kind of feeling of rushing through this urban world, right?
Right.
And you're right there with yourself. There's no question. I have trouble keeping that up in this context because my AI is still learning about things. He's still questioning things, right? He's absorbing things in ways that I'm not comfortable with at a really fast pace, right? So my pacing tends to be
I find
slower.
that first person you can extrapolate over like 300 pages because they're
Yeah,
like trapped in one guy's head, or one character's head the entire time. So
it's very hard.
I feel it's good in like little spurts and like short stories, but it's a bit difficult to like expand over like a whole novel.
Exactly. So I can, my character, can carry it over about 170 pages right now, and so I write from his point of view, right, close third person, and I'm looking at the way he's absorbing things because remember the theme is he's learning, right?
Right.
He's learning by being with humans. He's got his own fears. He's got his own ambitions. I mean, if you were just kind of came out of nowhere, I mean, you might even ask yourself, what am I doing here?
Does a close third person allow you to bring other elements that the main protagonist did not necessarily see into focus? Like, if it's first person, you only see what the character sees. If it's third person, you can throw a little bit more in there. And I
Right.
guess
What you
the
can't
closer or the
do.
farther away it is, the more you can throw in there, but the farther you get from the protagonist.
Yeah, yeah. And I love to think about these things, but it takes so long to write stuff that you don't get to experiment with everything. Um, yeah, when you go to close third person, what you lose though is you can't get into other people's heads. Okay. Close third person means that you never get to say that your protagonist looks weary, for example. You
Hmm.
can't. He's the one who's looking, right? You can say, oh, the other guy looks weary. Okay. That's all right. So you can focus on the other characters, right? Much better than in first person, at least in my opinion. But you can't get into their heads. You can only intuit what they're thinking from what they're doing. All right.
You're right.
So, but I'm interested in my guy, all right? And so, to write something with multiple points of view, at least this round, just didn't feel right.
Okay. And
So,
by your guy, you mean mainly the artificial consciousness.
my guy, yeah, my artificial consciousness is the mechanic. Um, I named him Hansi Boss. Uh, well, which is actually an interesting name, and because he originally came from Transylvania, you see, and his name means hunchback by the grace of God. Except he has nothing to do with
That's
God, and he's
another
not a
little bit of
hunchback.
the mystique that like you have to they'll be brought to the forefront if you read it, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm into that. I mean, even the title has layered meaning. What does initial condition really mean? Can we escape our where we started? Right? Can we forget it?
Well, there's a
Can our
lot of stuff you can go down a rabbit hole on, like
Man,
a
I
little bit
love
at least is
rabbit
coming out.
holes. The one thing I'd like to promise your listeners and, hope that they read is that, yeah, I'm into rabbit holes, but hopefully I let you find enough, right, that you're happy. All right. And you can imagine the rest. That's what we want, right? We want our readers to imagine it. It's like King said about telepathy.
Well,
If you can get your reader to imagine your world, you win. All right.
I think the best thing about fiction is when it actually brings up more questions than answers, but it does it kind of in like a subtle way, so you don't feel like everything's a mess. You feel like it's kind of concise, but you really wonder.
That's right. If we have a moment, I'll tell you how that sort of came about. Because it's a particular focus. My concentration on fiction, I didn't start in fiction, right? I've done a lot of things just like you. But I used to write nonfiction. I wrote a book called Four Laws for the Artificially Intelligent. All right. It was a serious book about, AI in companies. And this was before Chat GPT. All right. So we're talking about maybe 2021, so around there. And my publisher, for whatever reason, put it out within 2 weeks of a book called The Age of AI, which was written by Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger. All right. Now, as you might imagine, my book got swamped, but that's not what got to me. What got to me was I read theirs, and the first part of it was some history, a rehash, and the second part of it was kind of interesting. It was like 30 vignettes of AI in the future. But I looked at it and I said, how can that be nonfiction? I mean, we used to call that science fiction. And here were these guys talking about, their own forecasts as though it was nonfiction. And on that day, I threw away almost 100,000 words of a follow-up book and turned to writing fiction and I haven't stopped about writing AI since. I still write on AI and I never use it. Part of my charm.
All right, so if people want to check this out, is it like the beginning of a series? How do you have it planned?
Yeah, so I all my stuff start out with can be found on a website. I do gather it all together at www.iandomowitz.com, which is a mouthful, and maybe we can figure out a better
Spell
way to show
spell it
that.
spell it out for my listeners, because I'll put it
All right.
on the YouTube like video version, but there's some people that just listen.
Yeah, yeah. So it should be spelled IANDOMOWITZ.
Okay.
And I don't know whether this shows up. Can you see this?
Yeah, send that to me too, and I'll post it so people can see it.
Yeah. So anyway, um, everything is gathered there. If you're interested enough in this diary of an artificial intelligence, uh, it starts with something called "Wake the Whirlwind," um, that was published. You can find all the books on Amazon. I'm a Kindle Unlimited type, so if you're signed up for that service,
You
uh,
can
you
check
know,
it out, see if you like it.
just
Yeah.
check it out. Right, it's a library. I love them. There's a new one out actually called Artificial Condition that came out in January. And that one has a completely different set of messages to it, but hopefully a good time. And I expect the series to continue for a while. So just like Martha Wells, I don't know if you know it.
No, I have no idea who that is.
Oh, it's something called Murderbot. You got to check it out.
Okay. So what do you have available right now? Like how many books, how many short stories, what's available?
Oh, okay. So there are four books in this particular series called The Mechanic's Diary. There are another four books that are mystery novels that were written earlier about an autistic detective with an AI nurse by the name of Getz Parker. There's some nonfiction. I used to write in management and, like I say, in artificial intelligence. But taken together, that's sort of the written offering. So I gather that together on the website, right? Separate sections, explanations, even some cartoon stuff you might be interested in. I keep thinking that my character would be great for comics, but I can't draw, so.
Well, if you want the illustrator to get a hold of me, but yeah. So the best way to see yourself would be to go on the website. Is it also available on like Amazon or like a print on demand via Barnes and Noble stuff like that?
Yeah, it's all on Amazon. Just I do everything on Amazon these days, and that and the website, covers everything. My email's on there. I'm happy to talk to people. Get in touch.
Okay. If you were, lastly, if you were to compare it to something, like I'm not saying you're saying it's a ripoff. I'm saying, if you like this, you'll like my stuff. So would you say it's like kind of like along the vein of like Neuromancer or The Diamond Age or Snow Crasher? Like, is there anything that people can compare it to?
Okay, so the most comparable is the one that that I told you to check out. All right, it's called the Murderbot Diaries.
Okay.
All right. And it's by Martha Wells. Now, that's strictly sci-fi. I wouldn't call that fantasy. All right. But it has the same idea. She started publishing it back around 2017, and it involves this character who is an artificial intelligence, if you like. And her theme is consciousness. So this guy just goes on and he doesn't want to talk to anybody. He just goes on adventures. That may be the closest in spirit, all right, to all this. In terms of the world building, Snow Crash comes close. Although I'm a bigger admirer of William Gibson. And I say that simply because the futuristic part of this that I would call non-fantasy, right? The little bit of sci-fi is that I do build a world in which virtual reality plays a role. In other words, it's virtual reality becomes a place for my characters to act out. Let's call it the psychological part of the drama. So in that sense, Snow Crash obviously kind of brought that kind of writing, to the fore back in the 90s. But I think that it worked for me here, and I've kind of established an alternate reality based on projections. So in that sense, I guess we're sci-fi.
Yeah, when I first read Gibson and then Stevenson, both blew my mind. I was like,
Yeah.
I like it felt more relevant than like a lot of the stuff that was out at the time.
Yep. And, but if I had one guy to recommend to, your listeners, the way I understand your audience, I would say Peter Watts.
Okay.
You should read Peter Watts.
All right, so everyone should check that out. Everyone should also check out your stuff and give you tons of money. And hopefully
Please,
Netflix.
because I have to, I've got to tell you and everybody else on the line, I write dark fantasy and I'm having trouble finding an audience that's not looking for gremlins and warlocks, right? In other words, I'm looking for some readers that are willing to get beyond the cliche. And it's hard to find that audience.
Well, I think everybody likes what they've seen before until they see something new and they're like, holy shit. I mean, you look at like all the bands that broke big, like nobody expected them to make it. Everybody like talked them
Right.
down. And then all of a sudden it's like the next hot thing. Like Guns
Hmm.
N' Roses were like that. Rob Zombie was like that. Like everybody was like that. Like everybody put them down until like suddenly they're the big deal.
Yeah. But I'm serious, you said call me about the art. You should take a look at one of these books. I'll send you one if you give me an address. And there's a character in here. I'm convinced. I don't know of anybody who has, done graphic art concerning homunculus or, the idea of carrying these alchemical themes through. I mean, they're fantastic, man. I would love just to turn you on to that regardless of whether we would work together. Your fans would like.
Okay, awesome. All right. So, final little note. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Would they email you directly? Is there a contact on your website?
There are contacts on my website. They can also just email me direct. I mean, they can slip into my DM or they can, I'm at idomowitz at Yahoo. That Domowitz again.
You tell me
Uh,
Yahoo.
I should have done a pen name. But yeah, I respond to all emails, right? I love correspondence and I tend to be lively.
Okay, awesome. All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this.